General Hospital spoilers reveal that Drew's release did not come with sirens or applause, but with a quiet, terrifying certainty that the nightmare holding him captive was finally collapsing. For weeks, his world had been reduced to silence, paralysis, and the suffocating presence of Willow hovering over him like a shadow that fed on his weakness. He had existed in a state between consciousness and despair, aware of every cruel whisper, every calculated touch, every lie wrapped in the language of care. What changed everything was not a sudden medical miracle, but the intervention of two people who refused to accept the version of reality Willow had forced upon everyone else. Kai and Trina, driven by instinct, fear, and a growing sense that something was deeply wrong, became the unexpected catalysts who shattered the illusion Willow had so carefully constructed. Their refusal to look away, their willingness to question inconsistencies others dismissed as stress or grief, marked the first true shift in Drew's fate. Kai had always doubted Willow's narrative, sensing a cruelty beneath her controlled composure. But it was Trina's sharp perception that connected the final pieces. She noticed how Willow redirected conversations, how she isolated Drew from anyone who might challenge her authority, how her concern always seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. Together, Kai and Trina pushed past closed doors and carefully worded excuses, refusing to be intimidated by Willow's increasingly erratic behavior. Each step they took tightened the pressure on her, and with that pressure came mistakes, missed details, contradictions, moments of rage that slipped through the cracks of her performance. The more Kai and Trina pressed, the more Willow unraveled, revealing flashes of the obsession and cruelty that had driven her to control Drew's body and mind. The confrontation that followed was not explosive in the traditional sense, but devastating in its clarity. Kai and Trina exposed Willow's manipulations with evidence she could no longer twist or deny, forcing the truth into the open. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted completely. Willow, who had thrived on silence and helplessness, found herself cornered by voices that would not be silenced. Her cruelty, once hidden behind a mask of devotion, was laid bare, stripped of justification or sympathy. For the first time, she was no longer the one dictating the narrative. She was the one exposed by it. And as her control collapsed, so did the prison she had built around Drew. Drew felt the change before anyone spoke it aloud. The room felt lighter, less oppressive, as though the walls themselves were loosening their grip. When Willow was removed from his presence, the absence of her constant watch felt like oxygen flooding his lungs after weeks of suffocation. Though his body remained weak and unresponsive, something inside him surged back to life. The terror that had dominated his thoughts gave way to resolve. He was no longer alone in the dark, no longer at the mercy of someone who viewed his suffering as power. His release was not immediate in the physical sense, but it was absolute in every way that mattered. The psychological chains snapped first, and with them came a renewed will to survive, to heal, and to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. The shock rippling through Port Charles was profound. Willow's cruelty, once whispered about in fragments, was now undeniable, and its destruction marked a turning point far greater than anyone anticipated. Her downfall was not just the removal of a villain, but the erasure of a threat that had quietly destabilized everyone around her. The revelation forced the town to confront how easily evil could hide behind familiarity, how close they had come to losing Drew completely. For Kai and Trina, the victory was bittersweet, marked by the knowledge that their actions had saved a life but exposed a darkness that would leave lasting scars. Still, they did not waver. They had chosen to act when others hesitated, and that choice rewrote the outcome of everything that followed. For Drew, the aftermath became the beginning of transformation. Freed from Willow's influence, he was forced to face not only the damage she had inflicted, but the choices he himself had made before the stroke. Immobilized but clear-minded, he began reassessing who he had become and who he still wanted to be. The quiet hours of recovery turned into moments of reckoning, where ambition and ego lost their importance, replaced by the simple, grounding truth that survival was meaningless without integrity. The man emerging from this ordeal was not the same one who had entered it. He was humbled, scarred, and deeply changed, but also awakened to the cost of losing himself along the way. As Drew's recovery slowly progressed, so did the ripple effects of Willow's exposure. Her cruelty did not vanish without consequence. It left behind fractured relationships, shaken trust, and a community forced to rebuild its sense of safety. Yet within that wreckage lay something new, an opportunity for healing rooted in honesty, rather than denial. Drew's liberation symbolized more than the end of one nightmare. It represented a shift in the story itself, a rejection of manipulation and silence in favor of accountability and courage. Kai and Trina had altered the trajectory of lives far beyond their own, proving that even in the face of calculated evil, truth still had the power to prevail. In the end, Drew's escape was not defined by the moment Willow fell, but by the moment hope returned. His journey forward would be long, painful, and uncertain, but it would be his again, free from control, free from fear, and shaped by the knowledge that darkness, no matter how deeply rooted, could still be confronted and destroyed. And in that realization, the story of Port Charles shifted toward something no one had expected, not just survival, but redemption born from the courage to stand up when silence was the most dangerous choice of all. Drew's stroke marks a rupture unlike anything he has endured before, not because of its immediate violence, but because of the cruel patience it demands. This is not an injury that allows escape through action or denial. It is a slow sentence of reflection, forcing him into an intimate confrontation with himself that he can no longer outrun. Confined by a body that refuses to obey, Drew is left alone with memories he once buried under ambition, power, and anger. In the silence of recovery, time stretches mercilessly, and every thought echoes louder than it ever did when he was in control. He begins to recognize how often he justified questionable choices by convincing himself they were necessary, how frequently he dismissed the consequences because he believed he could manage them later. Now there is no later to hide behind. Each day of immobility becomes an examination of guilt, regret, and responsibility, and slowly, painfully, Drew starts to understand that many of the forces that destroyed his life were set in motion by his own hands. As weeks turn into months, that realization deepens into something heavier than remorse. It becomes resolve. Drew remembers who he once was, long before bitterness and ego reshaped him into someone unrecognizable. Fans of the man he used to be remember it to the Drew who was defined by loyalty, courage, and a genuine desire to protect others rather than dominate them. That version of Drew begins to resurface in fragments, not as nostalgia, but as a standard he now holds himself against. The contrast is unbearable at first, but it also becomes motivating. He no longer wants to survive simply to reclaim what he lost. He wants to survive to become someone worthy of the life he still has. The stroke, devastating as it is, becomes the crucible in which this transformation takes shape. Central to this awakening is Monica's legacy. In his long hours of recovery, Drew reflects on what the Quartermain name once stood for under her influence: integrity, resilience, and an unwavering belief that family meant responsibility, not entitlement. He realizes how far he strayed from those values, how easily he allowed personal ambition to overshadow the principles Monica embodied so effortlessly. Continuing her legacy is no longer symbolic. It becomes a promise Drew makes to himself. He wants to rebuild not just his body, but his moral foundation. To honor the family not through control or manipulation, but through accountability and protection. That goal reshapes his future plans, turning recovery into preparation rather than waiting. This internal shift coincides with a darker external reckoning, Willow. As Drew's clarity grows, so does his determination to confront what she did to him. At first, the idea of justice feels distant, almost abstract, overshadowed by the sheer effort required to survive each day. But as his mind sharpens, so does his anger, not the explosive rage of the past, but a colder, more disciplined fury. Drew understands that what Willow did was not an act of desperation, it was calculated cruelty. A deliberate attempt to control and erase him. The thought that she might escape consequences becomes unbearable. Sending Willow to prison transforms from a desire for revenge into a necessity for balance, a way to ensure that her actions do not fade into silence or denial. The prospect of exposing Willow unleashes a new wave of chaos, both internal and external. Drew knows that pursuing justice will not be clean or simple. It will drag secrets into the light, fracture already fragile relationships, and ignite conflicts that Port Charles is not prepared to face. Yet he also understands that avoiding this confrontation would mean betraying everything he claims to stand for now. The courage he once used recklessly must be reclaimed with purpose. Each step toward recovery becomes intertwined with strategy, as Drew begins to plan not just how to heal, but how to act when the moment finally comes. His body may still be weak, but his resolve hardens with every passing day. This is where the story veers into truly dangerous territory. The closer Drew gets to reclaiming his voice both literally and figuratively, the more unstable the world around him becomes. Willow senses the shift, even if she cannot fully see it yet. The man she believed broken is no longer passive, no longer content to endure. Drew's transformation threatens not only her freedom, but the carefully constructed lies that have protected her. The impending collision between accountability and denial creates a volatile tension that ripples through everyone connected to them. Nothing remains untouched, and the cost of truth promises to be high. Yet through all this, Drew remains grounded by one unshakable conviction: redemption must be earned. He does not expect forgiveness, nor does he believe transformation absolves him of past harm. Instead, he commits to action consistent, difficult, and public. Continuing Monica's legacy means accepting judgment as readily as praise, and Drew prepares himself for both. If Willow goes to prison, it will not erase what happened, but it will mark the moment where silence finally breaks. It will signal that cruelty has consequences, no matter how carefully it hides behind familiar faces. By the time Drew is strong enough to act, the story has already changed irreversibly. This is no longer a tale of survival alone, but of reckoning and rebirth. Drew emerges from this ordeal altered in ways that cannot be undone, scarred, humbled, and sharper than before. Whether he succeeds or fails in bringing Willow to justice, one truth remains clear: the man who entered this nightmare will not be the one who leaves it. The journey back toward heroism is neither quick nor guaranteed, but it is underway, propelled by the quiet determination of a man who has finally learned that legacy is not inherited, it is built, choice by choice, even in the darkest aftermath of loss. Jason understood that freeing Drew from Willow's control was only the first battle. The harder war began afterward, in the quiet spaces where damage lingered long after the danger was gone. Drew's return to the world was not triumphant or clean. It was hesitant, fractured, and filled with invisible scars that made every interaction feel heavier than it should have been. Jason stepped into that space without hesitation, not as a savior, but as an anchor. He knew Drew didn't need speeches or pity. What Drew needed was structure, presence, and a reminder that he was not alone anymore. Jason began guiding him back toward the people he had lost, helping him navigate the fragile terrain of reconciliation where guilt, anger, and unfinished business waited at every turn. Each visit, each conversation, each uncomfortable silence became part of Drew's slow reintegration into a family that had learned to survive without him. The heart of that reintegration centered on Danny and Scout. Drew's relationship with his children had been fractured long before his stroke, damaged by absence, conflict, and choices he could no longer undo. Now, faced with the reality of how close he had come to losing everything, Drew approached fatherhood with a humility that startled even Jason. He didn't demand forgiveness or instant closeness. Instead, he showed up quietly, consistently, and without expectation. Jason stood beside him through those moments, helping translate emotions Drew struggled to express and offering stability when things became overwhelming. Together, they formed an unspoken partnership, one built not on blood alone, but on shared responsibility and hard-earned trust. As Drew and Jason began co-parenting Danny and Scout, the balance of the family shifted in ways no one anticipated. Their united front created ripples that spread far beyond the household. Old tensions resurfaced. Questions about guardianship, authority, and influence ignited conflicts that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Some saw Drew's return as redemption. Others viewed it as a threat. Jason's involvement only intensified those reactions, because his presence signaled that Drew was no longer isolated or vulnerable. He was protected. He was supported. And that made certain people deeply uncomfortable. Behind the scenes, a new layer of calculation emerged. Drew was no longer reacting blindly to events. He was thinking strategically. Guided by Jason's hard-earned instincts, they began anticipating resistance, preparing for backlash, and adjusting their approach to protect Danny and Scout from becoming collateral damage. In adult power struggles, every decision where the kids stayed, who had access to them, how information was shared was weighed carefully. What looked like simple parenting choices were, in reality, defensive maneuvers against forces that still sought control. This was not paranoia, it was survival shaped by experience. The closer Drew and Jason grew in this shared responsibility, the more explosive the situation became. Their alliance challenged existing power dynamics and threatened people who had grown accustomed to chaos working in their favor. Drew's growth was no longer theoretical. It was visible in his restraint, his patience, and his refusal to be manipulated. Jason, watching this transformation, recognized something rare. Drew was not just healing, he was evolving, and that evolution made him unpredictable in the best possible way. Yet with progress came danger. The stability Drew and Jason were building drew attention, and not all of it was supportive. Every step forward felt like an invitation for someone to push back harder. The pressure mounted, forcing constant adjustments, new strategies, and difficult compromises. Drew began to understand that redemption was not a destination, but a process one that demanded vigilance and sacrifice. Jason, ever pragmatic, ensured Drew never forgot that protecting Danny and Scout meant preparing for storms before they arrived. As the family dynamic grew stronger, so did the tension surrounding it. What started as an effort to heal quietly escalated into a flashpoint that threatened to erupt into open conflict. The bond between Drew and Jason, forged in trauma and reinforced through responsibility, became both a shield and a provocation. Their shared mission to raise Danny and Scout in safety and honesty challenged the lies and manipulations that had thrived in Drew's absence. In the end, this new chapter was not about reclaiming the past, but redefining the future. Drew was no longer the man who stumbled blindly into disaster, and Jason was no longer fighting alone. Together, they were reshaping the family's foundation steadily, deliberately, and with full awareness that every adjustment they made could trigger consequences far beyond what they could see. The explosion everyone sensed was coming was not just chaos, it was transformation, driven by two men who had learned that the greatest battles were fought not with force, but with responsibility, loyalty, and the courage to change.